மறக்காம சர்ப்ரைஸ் பண்ணுங்க. Thank you.
The variation that we will be looking at here is knight takes e4, queen takes e4. This is a very standard operation for black. Knight f6, queen e2, now queen to d5. And the queen on d5 is of course very powerful. We keep talking about this d5 square, and it can be used by the knight, the rook, and even the queen. And actually what black's idea here is not only to have this powerful queen on d5, but in many cases we will actually be trying to play the move queen e4, trading queens. So a little unusual. The position here is very you have to pay attention to the details here, because we may have a position where we have these berserk attacks on the opposite, opposing king, but we may also have an endgame here. And the variation where we don't have an endgame here is this move bishop e3. And this is, I believe, the modern sort of mainline position for the classical Caro Kann that is being very, very debated in almost all levels of play. Now, what's unique about this variation from my point of view is that I've actually played it for both sides. And I've played this variation with white and with black, of course. And with black, I've scored 60% from this position, but I've also had my fair share of some tough losses here. And I've had to sort of go back into my lab and find new ideas for black to make this position preferable, or at least equal with good chances. And with white, I've scored 80% from this position, so I know how dangerous it can be for black here. Now, the whole point of this move, bishop e3, is to open up this rook on the d-file, and also to prevent this move, queen e4, at least make sure that it doesn't exchange queens. And in this very critical position, I've played two moves, and I'm going to be showing you both of them. I believe both of these moves are very good options, and promise black a good game. The first of these two moves that I want to go over, and the move that I've actually played the most here, is this move b5. And we're already very familiar with this move, of course, but the ideas here are a little different. One of the main ideas is to prevent white from playing this move pawn to c4 and displacing this really strong queen. And another idea is I'm actually just trying to launch a very strong, hopefully strong, attack against white's king. And let's see how this plays out. So in all the games that I've tested this move, and this is actually quite a rare move compared to the other options that black has here. That's why I've also really liked playing it, because my opponents tended not to have been aware of the best options for white. So all my opponents have played the move knight to e5, which is a decent move. The knight goes to the center and also prepares to play g4. Of course, if white tries to play g4 right away, I think after knight g4, there's not enough compensation for white here. He does get the open file, but it should be quite holdable here. In fact, quite nice here for black, because first of all, this knight can be supported by f5 or queen f5, and furthermore, this bishop can come to f6 in many positions and ensure that the king side is well defended. So I don't think it's sufficient to go g4 here. So knight e5 is much more reasonable. Now this knight on e5 is quite strong, so I played the move bishop to d6. And now knight to d3. This move has again been played in all the games that I've had in this variation. Other moves here don't make as much sense in my opinion. Bishop f4 is always going to allow the idea of queen e4 on the cards, plus this knight is now pinned. So for example, a move like rook c8 and then queen e4 is quite possible. And also, there's that move f4 possible, but I think this move is not that strong. It just weakens this e4 square, which can be very useful for the queen or even the knight, and also sort of limits this bishop on e3. So no surprise that in all my games knight d3 is played. Now I play the move a5, g4, and a4. And this is my whole idea. As I mentioned, these pawns are just coming down the board, and I want to play b4 and b3. So now white has sort of a choice. But the move that I've always faced here is f3, which I believe is the most natural and logical move. White wants to go all out and aggressive with moves like f4, but again, the problem here is that this knight can very easily jump into e4, either now or after a3, b3, knight e4, again, threatening all sorts of nasty possibilities. So in all my games, and I think it's the best move here, white has played the move f3, just preventing knight e4 for now. I've played the move b4, and now rook to g1. Here, or rather, the other rook to g1. As white would want to maintain this rook here for the attack. So here, white is also threatening to attack here with g5, so I've played the move knight to h7, and actually this is a position that I've reached twice. and I actually had this position before I even reached into these games. I had already prepared this and looked at this variation, and the first game, unfortunately, I lost, where my opponent played this move f4, and then I played b3, and then I played rook b8, and it was a very wild attacking game, but my opponent came out on top. However, when I went home later and analyzed the game, I realized that I made an error here, and I actually had, in a couple of months after I lost this game, I had an opportunity to reach this position again, and here I played the much stronger option, knight f6. So very nice idea here. Rook g1, knight h7, f4, now back to f6. And the whole point of this is that I'm burning up that tempo, but again, the square on e4 that I've been referencing, now the knight is ready to jump forward and potentially start a very powerful attack. Now, here's how that could look. My opponent actually played the move knight f2, after which knight e4, queen e4. Now that the queen was very strong on the e4 square, and again, these b3, a3 ideas are very powerful, and they're going to counterbalance white's g5 ideas. My opponent actually played the move queen d3. That's how much respect he had for my queen, and I used actually quite a nice idea here. After takes, white's pawn structure is all ruined. Rook a5, activating this rook here, rook to c1, rook c8. And the idea I want to show here is after my opponent played rook c4, it was f5, an unusual strike on the light squares here. And the whole point was that if he plays g5, takes f4, wins this pawn. And if pawn takes f5, as was played, and then after rook f5, suddenly all these pawns are targets, and I won the game actually in only 4 more moves here. So, of course, knight f2 here is not the most dangerous option, not very critical. Instead, white can try. Instead, g5 is very, very much to the point, getting this tempo here. And here there are 2 options for black. Now, the most reasonable, obvious-looking option here is to just take on g5 and then get ready to play knight e4. The computer suggestion here was to play h6, but after g6 takes knight e4, it looks like, even though it's quite scary for black's king, the position on the king side is kind of closed up. Meanwhile, we have a chance to break with a3 in order to weaken the c3 square, or even break with b3 to just blow up in the whole position. But my old analysis originally here, my computer recommended a very shocking idea here, the move a3 immediately. The point being that if b3 then knight e4 with tempo, getting to c3, and the forcing variation here is that if white plays pawn to f6, then pawn to b2, and the computer does not mind giving up a piece to blow open this king. It looks like we're down a piece, and white's attack is maybe just as strong as ours because of this rook coming in. But actually, the variations here tend to be around equal, surprisingly. And white needs to be really careful. For example, if he plays rook g7, then after king h8, this is actually a big mistake because after the unstoppable queen a2, queen a1, we're going to win the rook at h1. So white needs to play either he needs to immediately take on b2, for example, with the knight here as possible. If king takes b2, then rook takes a2, and tremendous complications here arise after the king moves to c1. Rook to a8, position's absolutely nuts, but seems like black's attack is very strong. b3 is coming, and it seems like white is holding on for probably a draw here, but black down a piece has a tremendous attack here. So after knight b2, some very crazy computer lines here. Queen a1, queen a2, king c1, queen a1, king b3, queen takes b2. White has rook g7, king h8, queen d3, counter-attacking before he gets mated. Black is just in time to exchange queens. And now rook a5, after rook f5, regaining this pawn on f6. Black should be around okay here, but mostly an illustrative line. Of course, completely nuts, and both sides have to be very careful here, especially white with his king in more danger than black's because of all of the black pieces that are swarming in. But, of course, this whole idea of bringing the knight back to f6 here, followed by knight e4. Again, after g5, it's quite possible to just take and follow with knight e4, avoiding sacrificing the piece. But I was planning, I remember when I played this variation, fully ready to sacrifice the piece and go all crazy. So this is one possibility here, this idea to move b5 here. And the whole idea is after knight e5, bishop d6, kick this guy out, start the counterplay, push these pawns down the board. Now it seems a little bit advanced, seems like there's a lot of moves to remember here, but in my experience, this position reached after bishop e3. 17 moves are played very quickly. Like I said, I've played this position with white and with black many times, over 30 times, I believe. And when this position is reaching the board, both sides are not really spending more than 5 minutes really getting here. This is all quite well known if both sides want to go for it. But the play does tend to slow down after you play b5. Again, a move that white players are not really familiar with, and quite a promising aggressive move. One more thing I can mention here is I've never faced this move, but it's been played in some high-level games, this move knight d2, which I've always wondered about because it feels like white may be sort of losing a little bit of time with this knight jump. Why doesn't he just go back to d2 right away? And again, our ideas here should be the very same. We're going to go a5, for example, g4, and now a4. And again, the ideas here is exactly the same. I want to play a3 and then knight e4 potentially, getting that knight to the juicy c3 square. And again, it looks like black's chances here are quite alright in this very aggressive opposite side castling position. Queen and d5 is very influential. Should be a good time for black. So this is the move b5 that I've analyzed many years ago and had the opportunity to test out on numerous occasions with quite a bit of success. But another move that I've been aware of for quite some time and recently played was the move queen to b5. Now, I really also like this variation, but I've noticed that in recent years, literally in the past couple of years, this move has gotten very, very popular, and now more and more players unfortunately know about it. And I say unfortunately because I always like playing options that my opponent is less likely to know. But still, I believe this move is very popular. It's getting well known at the Grandmaster level, but hasn't really permeated down to into even master level. So I did actually get a chance to play this move against an international master recently, and he was not completely aware of this move, although he reacted quite decently. So the whole point here is that, well, look, if white decides to trade on b5, then we're not really worried about these double pawns, but we're actually quite happy to get this c-file and this square in d5 for our knight. So that's not a worry at all. So white players play c4, and now, again, this is the same theme. We're luring white into playing the c4 move, queen f5 check, king a1, and now, okay, a little bit different. Usually we want to play this move b5, but not in this case because the queen on f5 has to be a little careful. There's ideas of knight h4 forcing the queen all the way back to h7. So a better idea is to play the move c5 here, gearing up to open up the d and c file, and this king on a1 trying to prove that it's in danger because this queen is attacking on these light squares. Now, in this position, again, as I said, it's getting quite popular, so white has a couple of options. In my game, my opponent played the very natural knight e5, centralizing the knight, getting ready to play g4. But after cd, bishop d4, rook f d8, again, just opening up the center, bringing the rooks there. White actually has to be quite careful here because black's pieces are active, and these pieces can become loose. And here's an example of what I mean. My opponent played rook h3, and now I set a little trap here with queen e4. And what happened in the game was queen e4, knight e4, rook d3, and now bishop f6 with equal position here. Some tactics are in the air involving this f2 pawn. The h5 pawn is a potential target as always. And the position was quite equal here, although, admittedly, I got a little too greedy here. My opponent played knight g4, and I decided to play very aggressively here with f5 and win this pawn, and at the cost of allowing my opponent tremendous activity. And I ended up losing the game after a lot of adventures. I will be attaching that game. But all in all, this position here is definitely equal. But the trap that I was setting here for my opponent when I mentioned these pieces are loose was this very obvious move, rook e3, preventing the queen exchange and forcing this queen potentially back. Well, I did not have any intentions of going backwards, instead planning the insidious rook takes d4, a queen sacrifice. But after the white wins the queen, this very nice double attack is going to yield me very good dividends, rook and 2 pieces for the queen here. Of course, white can continue the game with queen takes b7, but after rook e8, again, these pieces should be too strong. This pawn in h5 is hanging, and, well, I could only hope my opponents will fall for this in the future. But white does have a couple of other options here, but none that are troubling black, again, after the sequence of rook d8. This queen on f5 is very active. For example, if g4, it's possible to just play queen f4, and the queen is still quite a nuisance here, targeting everything on the 4th rank. And white's results have been not good at all in this variation so far. That is still sort of in its infancy, but black is just scoring very, very well here. And I will attach a couple of notes on that, but suffice to know up to this point, the only other critical option that white can try here is this move knight h4.
மறக்காம சர்ப்ரைஸ் பண்ணுங்க. Thank you.